Hey guys, I'm Steve Freeman, and welcome back to the Steve Freeman Podcast. I am, of course, your host, Steve Freeman, and I can tell you it is good to be back with you. I was on vacation last week. Me and the family went out to Los Angeles. We had a great time, but I'll tell you, it is good to be back. Today, we are talking about the top 3 mistakes that independent and unsigned artists make, and I think you're going to find some valuable information, some things to help you improve your career, improve your appearance, and I think it's going to be valuable for you. But before we get into it, I want to remind you, if you are listening to the podcast on Apple Podcast or anywhere else you get your audio podcast, please do me a favor and subscribe to the podcast. And especially if you're on Apple Podcast or iTunes, please leave us a review and give us those coveted 5 stars. I really appreciate those of you that are subscribed to the podcast and that are leaving reviews. You guys absolutely rock. If you're watching the podcast in video form on YouTube, do me a favor, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit that subscription button. Make sure you hit the bell icon next to it so that you're notified every time I upload a new video, whether it's podcast or just a video on music business or anything else. You'll be the first to know as long as you hit that bell notification icon. And if you're not following me on social media, you should be. It's at The Steve Freeman on all social media platforms. We even have a brand new Steve Freeman Podcast Facebook page and private group that you can join. A lot of cool stuff going on over there. And we have an Instagram page just for the podcast, and that is at the Steve Freeman Podcast. You can check that out as well. And so many of you are doing it, and I'm loving having you here. I'm loving hearing your feedback and being able to communicate with you. And that is my weekly newsletter, The Revolution. You can sign up for it at my website, thestevefreeman.com. You can also find it at thestevefreemanpodcast.com. Let's jump into it, guys. Today's topic are the top 3 mistakes that independent and unsigned artists make. The first one I think is a big one, and that is and has to do with having an independent appearance. Now, you may be an independent artist. You may not have that big budget that the major label artists have, but there's absolutely no excuse to not at least look like you do. It's okay to be independent, but it's not okay to look and sound and act independent. Unfortunately, in the world we live in today, perception is everything, and I've done a lot of videos on this and talked about this. We live in a perception society. You are you are the reality of your perception to other people, whether that's right or whether that's wrong. But the takeaway from that for you, the unsigned or independent artist, is it's important to look the role that you want to play. And whether that comes in forms of your live shows, your social media, the production of your music or your music videos, they need to look like a major label artist. And I know some of you are sitting there and saying, Steve, but I don't have the budget to do that. How do I do that? Guys, it's a lot simpler than you think. I hear from so many of you guys. Let's take record production. You want to make your new single, your new EP, your new album, and you've been out there looking. I get stories from people all the time where they've talked to producers who charge $5,000 a track. And you're thinking, Steve, if I want to do an EP, I don't have $30,000 to drop on an EP. If you even think about dropping $5,000 a track with anybody, you're stupid. It just doesn't cost that much. Even though I could, I don't charge near that much, because I think it's important for independent artists to have access to the tools and the production and the sound that the major label artists have. The fact of the matter is it doesn't cost any more to cut a major label record than it does to cut an independent record. But what there is a lot of fat, a lot of extra producer fees, a lot of cartage fees, a lot of studio musicians and session players charging double and triple scale. I don't work with people that do that because the product is the most important thing. So it doesn't cost what you're being told that it costs. You've got to educate yourself and know that if you're an artist, the music is your product. Your product has to be the best it can possibly be. And it is affordable and it is possible to do that. So reach out to me, do your research. It is possible. You don't have to do it yourself. There are a lot of resources out there, but so many of you fall into the category where you do a brief search or you study it a little bit, and then you think your options are 1, 2, and 3, and all of them are unaffordable. That is not the case. Talk about image for a second, pictures. Steve, I don't have $5,000 that these 3 photographers in Nashville or Los Angeles have quoted me that it's going to cost me to get a professional photo shoot. Guys, if you have a smartphone, an iPhone or something like that, it is possible now with the filters on these phones to take great photos, and they're high enough resolution to be able to use them on websites and social media and everywhere else. You have the tools at your disposal. And just because you don't have the $5,000 that this photographer over here is going to cost, that you can't have quality looking photos. You can't have the imaging of a major label artist. Yes, you can. Now, I think where a lot of you get hung up and caught is that you want to work with this producer because they worked with Jason Aldean, or they worked with Brett Young, or they worked with this other person. Just because they're doing something for one person doesn't mean they can adequately recreate those results for you. Same thing with pictures. Just because the guy that shot the cover of the Rolling Stone magazine last month, you can't afford to have him shoot your pictures, doesn't mean that they're not going to be quality, and they're not going to be good. They're not going to look good, and they're not going to serve their purpose. Same thing goes for music videos. I see a lot of you out there. I get the questions all the time because my artist development company, we shoot a lot of music videos for independent and unsigned artists, and we do them at a very high quality level, and they look exactly like major label videos. It's not hard to do, guys. There are resources out there. Your product doesn't have to suffer. I deal with this all the time with indie artists, and that is they constantly are thinking about budget and thinking about money. Money is important, but making the money work for you and using it in a smart fashion. Spend smart money. Don't waste money or spend stupid money. All of these things we've talked about, whether it's record production or photos or websites or music videos, all these things are easily obtainable on a reasonable budget. So get the best quality that you possibly can for what you have. And there are people out there that can help you do that. Stop trying to be an independent or unsigned artist that is trying to financially compete with a major label artist, because you can't do it. It's impossible for you to do. But it is possible for you to be an independent or unsigned artist and not look or sound like one. The second biggest problem that I think, problem and mistake that indie and unsigned artists make, is that you have no real organization or content strategy. And this is huge, guys. I mean, this is a big one. You know, the benefit of being signed to a major label beyond the financial investment that they make in your career is the organization that they bring from a production standpoint, promotions, marketing, media, and all of the things that go A&R, all of the things that go into being a label artist. They bring that organization. And I think a lot of you guys lack that. I don't think it comes from a place where you don't want to know or don't want to have a strategy or an organization. I think a lot of you don't know how to accomplish that. Most indie artists that I've seen in my history, they tend to shoot from the hip. And it's, okay, I'm going to try this today, and then I'm going to try this tomorrow, and I'm going to try this next week. That strategy doesn't really work. It's setting down and coming up with a unique strategy for you as an artist to succeed. How and when are you going to release your music? Are you going to do music videos? What is your plan to sell your music? How do you plan to do that? How do you plan to go from sitting in your bedroom writing the song and then recording the song and then selling it. There's a process that has to go into that. And most of you aren't prepared for doing that. You know, a successful artist career is like spokes in a wheel. I tell new artists this all the time. All these different spokes in this wheel are organization, strategy, advertising, marketing, all these different spokes that go into your career wheel. The thing that most of you don't understand is that if you remove any one of those spokes, the wheel is not going to turn. It's going to collapse and you're going to be on the side of the road broken down. You can't just have one piece of the puzzle and expect it to complete an overall picture. You have to have every piece of the puzzle. And I see that so often with independent artists, and I feel for you because it all comes back to budget. It all comes back to money. And whether it's any other kind of business, it doesn't have to just be the music business, but this is what I see overall. I can afford to do this, but I can't afford to do these other two things. Or I did this, I could afford to do that. Now I can't afford to do this thing over here. Or now I can afford to do this, but I can't do this thing over here. You have to be doing all of these things simultaneously at the same time for your effort to be successful. That may require some of you to take a step back and look and go, okay, I don't have the budget to do all three of these things at the same time the way that I want to do them. So maybe I have to back off just a little bit and find that middle ground of doing, I'll tell you this, let me put it this way. Doing a little bit of all three at the same time is much better than doing all of them one way all the time. Let me say that again. I think you need to hear this. Doing a little bit of all of it at the same time is a lot better than going 100% with one of them and not doing any of the others. Or picking them apart. I'll do this one today, I'll do this one next month, and then I'll do the third one the month after that because I can only afford so much this month. The sad thing and hard thing for a lot of people to accept and is this. And it's hard to say because I know a lot of you don't want to hear this. Maybe some of you don't need to be doing this because it does take making sure that all spokes in the wheel are attached and are strong and are functioning. If you can't afford to do that, then you need to do something to put yourself in a position and wait until you can. But don't try. It's like going into battle with an empty gun. Okay, you cannot go into, it's like, they always say why would you bring a gun to a knife fight or a knife to a gunfight? You cannot go in unprepared. And I see so many of you guys do that, and it absolutely breaks my heart because I see it break your spirit and I see it break your passion. When fundamentally you have to understand that there are many different facets of this business. That comes down to organization and strategy. You have to have a plan for organization and strategy if you want this to be successful at all, because you have to have all of these pistons, just like a fine-tuned American-made V8 engine. If you're not running on all 8 cylinders, there's a problem. You've got to be running on all 8 cylinders all the time. Figure out a way to make that financially possible. With our artist development company, I'll be real honest with you, that is one of the biggest challenges that we face on a day in and day out basis. And that is taking an artist's budget that they have and maximizing it, because we know that all of these different things have to be and need to be done for the overall effort to be successful. And there is an art to looking at somebody's budget, big or small, and going, we need to allocate X amount of dollars here, X amount of time here, X amount of organization and strategy here to make sure that we can get everything done for the budget that they have. I know that you guys, for the most part, don't have unlimited checkbooks. And this is an expensive business, and it's an expensive hobby. But you've got to find a way to make sure that you're firing on all 8 cylinders all the time. Because if you're not, you're just a slow car in the race. You're never going to win, and you're never going to cross the finish line. That I can promise you. The third mistake that I think most independent and unsigned artists make is they think too big. I get it. I understand watching The Voice or watching American Idol or watching these artists who seemingly go from completely unknown to playing stadiums overnight. That doesn't happen in our business. It may seem that way, it may look that way, but you don't know about the 5 years of development that artist spent with an artist development company, or sleeping in their car, or playing dive bars for 3 hours and 4 hours playing covers. You didn't see all that. You just saw them hit the charts, their music video on CMT or GAC, in the event that every once in a while they actually play a music video. But you don't see the process. So I think a lot of you think that, oh, I can do that too. I can be right where I am today, and then tomorrow I can have my video on CMT, or I can be opening for this major artist. It just doesn't happen that way. And I think it's a mindset, and it's a mindset that needs to change within your brain and in your mind. Think within your means. Think within your budget. Think within your capability. You think about striving to be a whale in a huge ocean instead of being a big fish in a small pond. One of our strategies with the artist development company, and this is where it's like we almost need to bring tissue to the meeting when we talk about this with our artists. And that is one of our most important strategies is the geographic strategy. And some of you have heard me talk about this before. Stop thinking about trying to take over the world and take over the 100 square mile radius around your hometown. How do you expect to be the biggest artist in country music if you're not the biggest artist in your hometown or the biggest artist in your city? How do you expect to sell out stadiums when you can't sell out the local venue in your city? That's what I'm thinking about, thinking too big. Yes, we all have dreams. We all have aspirations. We all see ourselves at the finish line. But there is so much that goes in between the starting pistol and the finish line. There's so much work that has to be done. And I think if you start thinking smaller, you will start to see that you're accomplishing more and more of your goals. Like I've said before, take a map. And I know it sounds ridiculous in the digital age that we live in, but take a map, get a map, drop a pin in the city you live in, and then draw a 250-mile circle in circumference around the city that you live in. That should be your focus. Period. End of story. You shouldn't worry about getting radio airplay here. You shouldn't worry about radio airplay at all because it's never going to happen unless you're signed to a major label. But you need to focus on saturating and completely taking over everything within that 250-mile radius. Because if you can't do that, how are you going to be popular in, let's say you're in, I don't know, Orange Beach, Alabama. I'm headed to the beach in a couple of weeks down there. Let's say you're in Orange Beach, Alabama. How in the world can you wake up every day thinking about people knowing who you are in Norman, Oklahoma, whenever nobody knows who you are in Orange Beach, Alabama? Think about your immediate surroundings. Stop thinking so big. It's okay to think small. And when I say think small, I'm not saying don't have expectations on yourself. Don't have those goals. I'm saying use those goals and make them stepping stones. Fight the battle that's immediately in front of you. Once you win that battle, then you go to the next battle. Going back to that circle on the map, once you completely saturate that 250-mile radius around your city, then you expand it to 500 miles, and then you expand it to 1,000 miles, and then 1,500 miles. You know what I'm saying is right, and it's speaking truth to you right now. I know that. But the problem is that you want to fight back because that doesn't happen as fast as you see it happening for other artists. And that's what I'm talking about, thinking too big. Are you standing in your own way? And I think for a lot of you, you are. Does my method take a little bit longer? Yeah, it takes a hell of a lot longer. But I was telling an artist the other night, the reason that I believe in doing things that way is we've all heard of one-hit wonders. And that's the last thing in the world you want to be, is a one-hit wonder. You want to be a successful artist, touring, selling music, selling merch, having that successful career. My method and why I do things and why I'm telling you guys to do things this way is that should you fall back a little bit, should you not always have that forward momentum that you think you're going to have, if it stalls out for a second, you're taking one step back. You're not falling all the way back to the beginning and having to start over. You just take one step back. And then from that vantage point, you take that step forward again. But you're falling back on solid ground that you've already accomplished, ground that you've already fought for, and that you've won. So guys, stop thinking so big. It's okay to look at your immediate surroundings and go, how can I affect what's in my arm's length reach? Some people call it low-hanging fruit. I don't like that. I just don't like that term. But in essence, that's really what it is. You guys are trying to reach that apple tree that's 16 miles into the forest instead of picking the oranges on the tree that are right there in front of you that you can actually reach. Stop thinking so big and think a little smaller, because the other thing that it does for you, and I think this is one of the most important things, you've heard me say it a million times, and that allows you to have more victories more often. And you've heard me say it, if you can't appreciate small victories in your journey to becoming a successful artist, you are destined for disappointment and failure and depression, because that's ultimately where it leads. Thinking a little smaller allows you to create more obtainable and achievable goals, which means that you get that victory, and they come way more often than setting your sights too big and on that mountain that's a little too high to climb and a little far off. So guys, those are, in my opinion, right now as we sit here, the top 3 mistakes that independent artists and unsigned artists make. Your independent appearance, no organization or strategy behind what it is that you're doing, a lack of education could be added in there, and 3, you have a tendency to think too big. It's all right every once in a while to sit back and evaluate where you are and where you want to go, and that's a good thing. But what I think a lot of people forget to do is focus on that middle part. You know where you are and you know where you want to go. But what are you doing in that middle section? Because that's what matters. That's the work. That's the journey. Do you have a strategy? Do you have organization in place to allow that middle part, that journey, to actually be productive and lead to where you see yourself going? I think it's of the utmost importance. Guys, thank you so much for being here for another episode of the Steve Freeman Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that bell notification. If you're listening on Apple Podcast, please subscribe to the podcast, leave us a review, give us those 5 stars. And no matter anywhere else you're listening to the podcast, whether it's Stitcher, iHeartRadio, radio.com, Spotify, Google Play, you can subscribe to the podcast at any of those places. Follow me on social media at The Steve Freeman everywhere, and sign up for The Revolution, my weekly newsletter full of tips, tricks, advice, and a lot of personal stuff too, which I don't get to get into here on the podcast very often, but I hope you will. You can sign up for The Revolution at thestevefreeman.com or thestevefreemanpodcast.com, or you can click the link in any of my social media bios and it will take you basically anywhere you want to go. Guys, thank you for being here, and as always, keep being creative, keep pressing the boundaries, and there's nothing wrong with being independent. See you in the next one.